Okay, guys, back in Houston, finally, after the show in Costa Mesa. Today is the wrap-up show for that. And it's not like any other wrap-up show because that show is not like any other. Stay tuned. Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Back in Houston, just had a fun night out. Just released a YouTube short with Stephanie. Ran into her. Longtime members of the channel will remember Stephanie. She'll be back on the channel. I just haven't been in town enough to hook up with her and show you some stuff from her perspective that used to be a lot of fun on the channel. I have a whole playlist if you're not familiar with Stephanie. But tons of stuff still to get out to you, even back to Germany, all the shows prior year. This is my next 2 months before I travel again, at least that I know of, to get some stuff out to you. But I wanted to wrap up Costa Mesa with this video, as well as I'm going to be doing a Zoom with all my members that were there. And I like to do these kind of wrap-up shows with not just my opinion, which I'm going to give you today, but also all the people, which quite frankly, that's my biggest takeaway of this show, why it's different from all the others. So many of the members of my WhatsApp group and friends of mine go to this show. In fact, I feel bad because even though we had dinners planned Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, big tables, I still didn't get to see everybody. So on that Zoom that I do Sunday, and I'll release it probably after that, unless we go live, I will share with you the opinions of as many audiophiles as possible of this Costa Mesa show. Because again, I like to give you multiple opinions, not just my opinion. Anybody that's saying that they know it all and you should just follow them and whatever they say, you know, that's a big red flag. This hobby is based on a lot of subjective opinions. However, what you will find when you listen to a bunch of these very educated opinions is that we hear and see alike because it is based in some level of high fidelity metrics. And that's one of the great takeaways of this show that I'm going to share with you. But before I even get into that, again, number one takeaway, seeing many of you guys, great vendors there. It's a smaller show and has been kind of, I would say, quite honestly, has been on the decline in terms of attendance and the quality of the show in recent years, especially back in the years when it used to be synonymous with CES going at the same time in Vegas, and even in Newport when it was a big show. It used to be one of the top 2 or 3 shows. And then Long Beach, to its credit, I got to give the show credit. In fact, it's still the show in terms of the acronym, but it's now Total Hi-Fi Experience Show instead of the Home Entertainment Show. That's an FYI I learned this time. But it had gone downhill, even though they deserve a lot of credit for being the first show to put on an audiophile show after COVID. That was very brave of them. Even Rocky Mountain couldn't pull that off. And in fact, they failed trying to do it right after COVID. So this show deserves a lot of credit for being stubborn and doing it. And but quite honestly, it's been going downhill. But they've gotten some new people on board, and this show definitely showed a tick up, not only just in attendance, but the quality of vendors for the most part were high quality. May not have been as big as prior shows in the past, may not have the attendance that people want ultimately, but I definitely saw a trend upward and potential versus last year. I was a little bit worried. So that was a great takeaway from this show, is that things were on the upswing. And to that end, most of the rooms, most of the vendors, top notch. I can't remember a room that I went into that was totally bad relative to the conditions they were given. Okay, you're never going to hear anything at the pinnacle of the gear, although I'm going to give you a few rooms that are the best I've ever heard that gear. But for the most part, these rooms are not going to be the best ever, but I didn't hear anything super disappointing. There are a few rooms, even though it was a small show, I have to apologize, I didn't get into, or I got into them, but then the video was subsequently blocked. Let me just tell you guys something. Sometimes if Bob Dylan is played when I go in there, or especially the Eagles, Hotel California, which is very popular, I'll upload the video thinking it's good, but guess what? It gets blocked totally, not even shared revenue. All the other videos I upload, I make no money on because it's shared revenue because of the song. But some bands like Eagles even block the video totally from getting seen by you. And so that's a minefield I just have to navigate and understand as part of the territory with the way I cover these shows. So there's some rooms that fell into that bucket, but I know there was a room, the Grim Audio. I wanted to go in there. I didn't have time. I was heading to Bakersfield to help set up a Bach with a customer, so I had to leave early. So there was a lot of things I didn't get to. And really, I don't want you to read into coverage if I don't go into a room that I don't like it. But I will be honest, there is occasionally vendors I will avoid. And this show did have one vendor that, if you're a member of my channel, watch my membership videos a few years ago, there is a brand that I think is at the very bottom of the bottom, both distributor and brand wise. I just don't even go into their room. It's not about being negative. It's not about being, creating any kind of drama. I just don't believe in that distributor or brand in terms of things that have not even happened to me, happened to my friends and other dealers. And again, stuff in the membership section, but I just don't go into that room, period. But otherwise, very top-notch show with the quality of people. And one thing about this show is that you get to see some people you don't see at other shows. And just to give you some of my best of right off the bat, one of the names that pops to my head immediately when I go to this show is Steve Norber with Prana Fidelity. His rooms are always at these shows, and he always provides great music, great sound, at a great price relative to the competition at his performance level. And sure enough, his room, although I had to leave in the middle if you watch my video, because I had to go check out of my room and I wanted to go back, I just didn't have time to go back. But he's got quality gear, Baltic birch cabinets that from most companies, the bigger conglomerates would charge $50,000 or more for that kind of performance. He's charging, I think, under $20,000 for that level of performance. And if you heard in that video, I was very impressed. Point source box speakers tend to image 2/3 of the room down. His was imaging more like a line source. I was very impressed. So props to Prana Fidelity right off the bat, one of the rooms that stood out. I don't have a whole lot of other ones that stood out well above the others, but the bar of all the rooms I uploaded videos on was pretty high, either from performance or innovativeness. But there was one room that was the most memorable that I've seen, not only at this show, but could be the most memorable room of any show in terms of showcasing their gear in a deconstructed manner, was the Acoustica Eterna room. They were there last year, and I was super impressed with what they were doing. But this time they had glass cases showing all the parts that go into their pieces, and this almost, I think he used the analogy like a Rolex watch, volume control, inspiration. That's over $60,000, but this is what the hobby's all about in some cases. The exotic Ferrari level, Rolex level type stuff, and showing it in a case of all the pieces and parts that they meticulously put into these pieces. I've never seen that in a room before. And that was super memorable. And that's a brand that I've only seen at this show. So big props to the show for showing this company, this company really going all out to give you an impression of what they're all about. Again, in that tight room, the horns, it's not about the sound quality per se that blew me away, but the company itself still blew me away with how they presented everything and what potential is. And I think even my friend Rick Brown, who you've seen on the channel, they're based in San Diego, not too far from him. I think he was impressed too, and maybe checking them out more. And so I might have more information in the future on that. Another room that I'm doing this off the cuff, guys, no notes. And it's late at night. It's like 2 in the morning after going out. But I thought this is the best way to do these wrap-up videos, because whatever pops to my head is organically what really stood out to me. And another thing that stood out to me on a sound quality metrics, that I hadn't heard from this brand before, that I heard better than ever, was the Diptyque room. Now, they did have the benefit at the show of having one of the better sounding rooms. It was the same room that I think Linkwitz had last year. Much bigger, and if you set up things properly in that room, you can get a high level of performance, much higher than a hotel room. So they did have that advantage. But I got to tell you, Diptyque has always impressed me, certainly relative to Maggie's. But they still have had, in fact, one of my members of my channel that you've seen on the channel had bought one of their $30,000 models. And unfortunately, it did have a high bar in terms of performance for certain volume levels and certain music. But like many panels and prior to electrostatics like the potpourris have always been my bugaboo, you couldn't play certain dynamic material and you couldn't play loud. And sure enough, even though the Diptyques were better than Maggie's in a lot of respects, they still had some limitations that kept them out of the top tier of best cost no object. However, at this show, they addressed many of the things that we noted, my friend noted and shared with me as being a problematic thing in terms of utmost performance. And they changed from the MDF cabinet. They made a wider panel. They could play dynamic material. They weren't afraid to turn it up. You could ask them to turn it up and they wouldn't balk at it. And this room was very well run. Michael ran that room, who also was with me in Germany for the tours of Via Blue and AVM. And I'm very impressed with that new reference model Diptyque. That was the best I've heard Diptyques yet. So if you can afford the price point, I think it's around $60,000, and the wide panel, that's a new bar that's been set for Diptyque performance, and puts it a lot closer to the ones like Ulcivox in performance levels. Maybe not quite there yet, but very close now. And I think that was a great thing to see, because not all brands can be, with their first models, world beaters. Diptyque was very impressive with their early models, certainly enough for most people's taste, but now they're starting to encroach on, the best of the best line sources. So great to see. Props to Diptyque. Let me just think off the top of my head, anything else that blew me away. Well, I'll tell you, anecdotally, I like to give you some stuff, although you'll hear in the Zoom. I was hearing a lot of good things about Baze audio for the first time, and that's the AV luxury group. It's actually the people I featured, a dealer, January of this year at CES in Vegas. They came to this show and they set up in a room that, quite frankly, last year, I think it was Griffin, and they were doing all this pretentious stuff where you had to buy a ticket, well, not buy, but get a ticket for a scheduled demo and all that. I'm not a big fan of that kind of stuff, guys. The pretentious stuff and scripted demos and all that. There's a time and place for that. Anyway, this was, I think, a much better way. You could just walk in. They deserve extra credit because I talked to Thomas there. They had a lot of problems in terms of a damaged amp that they had to replace last minute. And I've told you guys this. I had to deal with it myself in Tampa when I had a mini room that I had to run myself. You do not know all the stuff that goes on in the background that people have to deal with. They dealt with a lot of last minute challenges, still got it set up, and was impressing a lot of people, such that the scuttlebutt I was getting was that this is the best they've heard the Baze speaker. Kind of like I was talking about, for me, best I've heard the Diptyque. Now, I would argue that as good as the Baze did sound in that room relative to other show conditions, you should go to the dealership in Las Vegas and hear them there. So I'll put up a link to my video, or at least a screenshot of the thumbnail. Watch that video. Burmester with Baze is a very good match, and at least you got a taste of that at the show. I can't go without saying, though, that the room that I spent a little time in and did one night dedicated from 4 to 5, dedicated demo, was the Potpourri and the Bach room. Now, Bach actually was not supposed to be there. This was a customer that owns the Potpourri WR3 in that same area of town, offered to bring the Bach because it still was not perfect. Although all Friday, they ran the potpourri room, no Bach, no room correction, nothing, just a few room treatments, and people were getting blown away. They were having to kick people out of the room in terms of the center seat to get the traffic moving. However, when this gentleman brought the Bach and helped implement that, and to Dynamic Sound Systems' credit, this was a product that they don't even carry, and they were putting it in their room that they couldn't make money on, the Bach for Mac. They allowed it in their room because they heard the value of the Bach. And in fact, the owner and Lewis, the employee, they loved the Bach so much, they're going to become a dealer of the Bach. Actually, two new dealers of Bach came out of this show alone because they were able to A/B before and after, and I showed you with videos the measurements before and after in the ear at the listening position. Something that no other room at these shows can do. They can even show you anechoic measurements. They can show you clippo measurements. But the stuff that people sweat about, I start looking at some of these reviews. I don't want to get into drama or anything, but I mean, it's so comical to see people measure 1 foot away or use clippo and get all bent out of shape about measurements of a speaker, especially some budget speakers, like under $1,000 or budget speakers. They get all bent out of shape about these measurements 1 foot away, benchmarked against perfect high fidelity metrics, which is unreasonable for a budget speaker, to be honest with you. But that delta between perfect high fidelity and 1 foot away measurements is nothing, literally nothing, compared to in-room at your listening position and any company's specs from an anechoic. When you get in the room at the listening position, what you are hearing is nowhere near, especially under 200 hertz, what the specs are showing what you bought. So it's sheer folly, in my opinion, and it's the epitome of not seeing the forest through the trees to sweat clippo measurements, 1 foot away measurements, specs that in reality have nowhere near as close to what you're going to hear at your room, at your listening position. And that's why I'm such a big fan of the Bach, because it takes the measurements in your ear at your listening position, and then you can benchmark those after the correction to whatever high fidelity metric you want, anything, and it will so far superior beat even some anechoic measurements. I'm going to show you a home in Bakersfield that any speaker would love these measurements in an anechoic chamber, much less at the listening position in ear. So big props to Mike Sweck and Lewis at Dynamic Sound Systems putting together that potpourri room, the AGD electronics, the hi-fi rows. This was also showing where the Bach could just fit in and still use whatever DAC you want, in this case of the hi-fi rows, whatever preamp you want, including the AGD, or it could have replaced all of those things. But as room partners, it can just fit right in. Use that as you wanted. It got Best of Show from Acoustica, one of the longest running brands. And the most important feedback was that nobody was getting out of that center seat. So we'll have some more videos. Some people were filming my presentation that I gave, I think at 4 p.m. or something. I'll give you some more on that. But that's a brand, Bach, that I represent. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. But the potpourri, AGD, hi-fi rows, were definitely wowing people in Costa Mesa. Again, all the other rooms, phenomenal in terms of playing great music, even much more budget systems. I can always remember Tonian Labs is always going to be there. It's not the most, Oriaco, it's not going to be the most extravagant gear. It's not going to be the most extravagant system. He's going to play CDs. He can play his own material, some esoteric material, but this is what makes that show fun. It's stuff that you don't always see everywhere else. There was also a home theater SVS thing. I didn't really get into that, but all the big rooms and Scott Walker Audio, Rock on AV had a big thing. I met him. Actually, he's one that's interested in the Bach. Some of the dealers that were sponsoring stuff were Common Wave, I think it was, took a whole floor. big props to the dealers and distributors that took more than one room. It's not easy to do that. Upscale Audio, another one. You got to give these companies props because it's very difficult out there right now in the brick and mortar business. There's so many tire kickers, time wasters, people that go into your store and then they buy elsewhere, or they just never have the money to begin with and they just waste your time. That's a big problem that brick and mortar has to deal with. And for them to go through all the costs for just a 2 or 3 day show, that's why I like to give all these rooms credit, go into each room, and while everything can't be my personal favorite, I can see where almost all of these brands can resonate with some of you. And I'm going to give you the perspectives of a bunch more people on Sunday. Right now it's only Thursday. I don't know when I'm going to get this video out to you guys, but stay tuned for a total wrap-up video from all the people involved, including, I think, Mike Sweck and others that ran the Potpourri room. And any other vendor that wants to participate in that Zoom, reach out to me when you see this video. I'm happy to have any other vendor in there, share whatever thoughts you want to have. It's all about giving you guys as watchers the biggest perspective as possible. So stay tuned, guys, and I'll see you back here soon.